This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Many of you recognize that. That's the Guest House by Rumi, who has lots of wonderful mindful poems. And that's a preview of what we'll do after I talk about the two wolves. But the idea that everything is to be accepted, including maybe if I had to talk about chutzpah, saying I might want to rewrite a Rumi poem, the idea, even I would say, especially if they're a crowd of sorrows. And this is one of our big problems, is the fact that we tend to walk away, run away from our particular afflictions, and all they do is just chase us down. So, but before we get to that, I want to start with the legend of the two wolves. I've heard this said a bunch of different times, so if mine doesn't coincide with what you heard, so be it. A young boy was talking to his grandfather, and his grandfather was talking to him about two wolves of the heart. There's the wolf of love and connection, which is, good to us all, kind, helps take care. And then there's the wolf of fear and anxiety, which is, anxious and snarling and difficult. And they both live in your heart together, and they fight with each other somewhat. The question comes up often, well, which wolf wins? And the grandfather says, whichever one we feed. So that's another idea about getting to the whichever one we feed. So we feed the wolf of love, we get that, or we get more synapses in those areas. We don't feed the wolf of anxiety and fear, that tends to go away as well. And this is and there's lots of ways to do this, and we're certainly going to talk about a lot of this tonight in two different manners, but this is our first way to talk about the divisions in our nervous system. I find it peculiar, but after all, life is full of peculiarities, that our nervous systems seem to be at odds at times. But this is one that's probably a reasonable thing to regulate. Kidding, that's my balance part. My little slide relating to balance in the nervous system, meaning that there is one part of the nervous system, when it goes down, the other goes up. When one goes up, the other goes down, and that yin-yang thing. And the two nervous systems, part of our regular body regulation, are called the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. I didn't name these. If I had, I would have given them simpler names, parasympathetic. But the sympathetic nervous system is the nervous system of the kind of doing battle, dealing with danger, fight, flight, freeze stuff. And the parasympathetic nervous system is often called tend and befriend, or rest and digest. And there they are. There's the two things about them. The sympathetic nervous system sees danger and sees threats, protection for the individual. And the parasympathetic nervous system sees safety and the possibility for connection. There it is, fight, flight, freeze versus rest and digest. And there's some physiologic changes that happen when the nervous system is in overdrive. There's increased heart rate, there's increased blood pressure, increased flow to the muscles. You're ready to do battle if you need to do battle. You're ready to run if you need to run. So those kinds of things are what's happening with that particular way of doing that. You have a decreased amount of supply to your gut and your kidneys. Actually on here too, also your immune system is somewhat suppressed. And you might have a hyper focus, which is not the same as mindfulness. And the main hormones that do this are adrenaline, we all know adrenaline, and cortisol. And the parasympathetic nervous system has less blood supply to the kidneys. It's digesting food, it's getting ready for tend and befriend, for repairing itself, for growing, for doing, connections with others. And its kind of main hormone is oxytocin. So that's just a very, very basic thing, and I'll come back to it in a little while. But I want to go back to our hunter-gatherer people. So we have a negativity bias in our particular nervous systems. If I ask you right now, and you can make this answer if you want to or not, think of a time you let somebody down. You find that pretty easy. You find where you were in conflict. You found that there's some difficulty. If I say, and let's face it, we've all done things that have let people down. We've all had some difficulties with people. If I say to you also, tell me a time when you were a hero, you have to sort through that quite a bit. And I know that you've all been heroes. I know that you have all done things above and beyond the call of duty for your friends or your society or your school or your church or your workplace or whatever. I know that that's happened. We tend to have a negativity bias. We tend to be and we're going to do a little Rick Hansen exercise later. Rick Hansen likes to say, we are Velcro, sticky, for negative events, and Teflon for positive ones. So we don't notice the positive ones. We tend to have the negative ones sit upon us quite heavily. Let's go back to our hunter-gatherer, our people on the savannah. Bob and Og, they're friends. They're part of the same hunter-gatherer group. They're out, kind of hanging around, maybe foraging, maybe hunting. They're just kind of out around. And suddenly they hear a rustle in the bushes. Now, Og is very optimistic. He likes these things. He sees things as opportunities. He's always kind of going for that kind of stuff. And he's maybe a little reckless. But Og says, wow, that could be a small animal we could capture. It might be a friend that's come to hunt with us. It might be a woman I can mate with, something like that. He says, wow, this is really good. I'm going to go check this out. Bob, on the other hand, is suspicious. That might be an animal that is too big for us. It might give us harm. It might be somebody from a neighboring hunter-gatherer group that is willing to throw spears at us. Might be a snake. Let's stay away. So they both have their way of doing that. If Bob is wrong, meaning he missed the opportunity, well, he missed the opportunity, but he gets to live another day. If Og is wrong, and he investigates, and he's wrong, there's something there that's going to get him, he gets killed and doesn't get to pass on his genes. This is why in modern day, there are more people named Bob than Og. All the Ogs have been killed off. So what we have here is in the hunter-gatherer societies, a degree of suspicion against the unknown and that negativity bias that things are more likely to be a problem than they are to be an opportunity. And don't forget, we have tens of thousands of generations going. This is a lot of natural selection that go to that, so that by the time we enter the area of civilization and agriculture, those genes for being fearful and suspicious are very high. And the genes for opportunity and connection are relatively low. We know, in order for us now as a superorganism, that we need to have the genes for connection and opportunity. And therefore, and they're still there. We just need to nurture them a little more. But we are, in a little way, going upstream from the evolutionary push of several 100,000 years. Let's talk about stress. Anybody want to give, it's one of those things that I always find really interesting. You're not going to get your mic for this one, but I'm going to ask people, I'll repeat it so that people know. Somebody just give me a definition of stress. You heard the word stress. Everybody says, oh, I know what stress is. Give me a definition. Anybody, just pop it up. Yeah. Undue pressure. Undue pressure, yeah. Anyone else? Unresolved conflict. Unresolved conflict. Ooh, I like that one. Anyone else? I'm sorry? Anxiety, yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry? Failure to get what you expect. All wonderful little ways of doing this. The official medical definition is a non-specific reaction to change rather than anything else along those lines. And it might really surprise people that the medical term for stress has only been around since 1959. We all think it's been really going on for a long, long time. As a matter of fact, I remember yelling at the TV. I was watching a Bonanza. Remember Bonanza? I was watching a Bonanza rerun and somebody was having difficulty and they said, I'm so stressed. I said, they wouldn't have said that back in 1880. No one had that idea. But it quickly, from 1959, as a little, kind of corner of the medical community, became, kind of well known by 1970. It was something that we all kind of was related to. And so this is, I'm going to show you my good friend, you. There's you. I hope you can see him pretty good. So you is kind of hanging around in what we call okie dokie hood. The official medical term is homeostasis, but if I like okie dokie hood. He's fine. Nothing bad's going on. And suddenly there's an external, or maybe let's just do it to start with that, an external event that may be a problem. So the tiger at the door is what people all talk about. There's a tiger at the door. And he has to react in that one of those three ways: fight, flight, or freeze. And so if there's really that danger. I want to really make it clear, however, well, maybe I'll get back to that later about the timing of this. So he can either fight the tiger, not really a good strategy. He can try to flee from the tiger, which works only if he's hanging around with people who are slower afoot than he is. Or, and this is the one that actually the lizards do, the lizards learn way along, he can freeze. It's interesting. You think that predators would have gotten better over all of these, millions of years, but most predators don't respond unless something's in motion. So And that requires the autonomic nervous system to go into overdrive, mostly sympathetic nervous system stuff. And that requires also the outpouring of the hormones of adrenaline and cortisol. And as you see there, that, all of the things that we were talking about, hyperarousal, increased blood pressure, increased respiratory rate, increased muscle stuff, decreased kidney stuff, decreased immune stuff, ready to do battle. And if things resolve pretty quickly, you're okay. If they don't resolve, then you have to kind of continue on with that. And I will tell you that in most cases, and simple things, this is Jill Bolte Taylor, who we'll learn about tonight, has a thing called the 90-second rule. If you actually see something that is in your consciousness that seems to be a threat and turns out not to be, the classic thing we talk about is if you're walking in twilight or you're in your basement and you see something coiled out of the corner of your eye, your mind actually, bingo, your intellect act reacting before you know what it is, sees it as danger. And think it's like maybe a snake. And boom, you have this flooding. But that's all gone in 90 seconds. If you don't do anything differently, in 90 seconds, you're back to normal, just like the zebras. However, most of the time, in many situations, we just kind of keep feeding the beast, so to speak. But anyway, if a lot of that stuff is going on, we try to inhibit the stress reaction with our own, like we can't be, if we're nervous about something really difficulty, then we get that and we get things like chronic hyperarousal, hypertension, sleep problems. The muscle aches go on, anxiety, memory problems. Remember we talked about the hippocampus earlier? This is one of those things that happens. The hippocampus gets poisoned by the steroids and actually the cells die. Your immune system goes down. But at some point, you see there's an arrow going from there. You can still somehow return to okie dokie-hood. It's not a fun place to be all the time. And this left side of this thing is for people who are either getting several major jolts or chronic little ones. Then there's maladaptive coping. On there is interesting. The number one thing that people do for maladaptive coping is overeating, but overworking and hyperactivity are also there. And then there's another way that people do this too, shopping. So Ron Siegel, who I've given as a reference here, he's just a wonderful person. Look up his videos, read his books, he's great. He had a conversation in the early 90s with Bill Gates. And he's talking to Bill Gates, and they're talking about the expansion of the internet. A little bit now, it's big. And Bill Gates says, the internet will be the best marketplace the world has ever seen. And Ron Siegel says, marketplace? I don't know. I mean, maybe, but I'm thinking about maybe a library or a research tool or a way to connect. But, I can't see it being a big, commerce thing. To which Ron Siegel says that's why he's Bill Gates and he's not. But people do, but shopping is one of those ways that people kind of take care of stuff too. And maybe you can return to, but if you don't, often people go down the pathway of substance abuse, food, gambling, those kinds of addictions, which eventually leads to psychological and physical exhaustion, breakdown, depression. Sometimes, you wear out your heart attacks, strokes, things like that. So that's your life. I hope you're enjoying it. What we have, however, people, is that we're not necessarily being chased by lions and tigers, but we're kind of dying of 1,000 paper cuts. All these little things that turn out to be a problem. The mindfulness solution is on the right, which is the same thing happens. Whenever something happens, that notice the stress response. The instruction is to respond to that mindfully, which means paying attention to thoughts and, more importantly, body sensations. The body is back here. And just being aware of that, just staying with it, staying with it. And eventually you will have the fight, flight, freeze response. It'll still go on, but it will resolve quicker, and you will be able to have more problem-focused strategies. You won't have this great push to do whatever the easy survival strategy is. And when all of that happens, awareness of the full context, seeking new options, the quicker recovery, what we say is the next stressor comes along, is only 99.99% as strong. It loses a little juice every time we pay attention to it. 0.01%. But guess what? A lot of us get a lot of chance to practice that. So our good friend Rick Hansen talks about this really wonderfully. He talks about red zone, green zone. Red zone, horrible, full blast, you're really having difficulties. Green zone, very chill, you're doing well. What he is saying is that so many Americans live in what we call the pink zone. You never really get over it. You're always got a little bit of anxiety going on, all that sort of stuff. And the first thing before I get into how we do that to ourselves, when stress is relieved, it feels really nice. You get a little bit of a dopamine push when that happens. So in one way, stress can be an anxiety, but it's a different context. Fall Sundays in Wisconsin, stress response, Green Bay Packers. There it is. It's a stress response. It's actually, you're sitting there on your edge. Are they going to win? Are they going to lose? Is this going to happen? It's no different than, being chased by the tiger, but it's going to be okay. And when it's over, especially if they win, you feel good. You have that kind of thing. Even if they don't win, you sometimes feel pretty good. But if you don't, it may not surprise people that domestic violence is up on the Monday after a Packer loss in Wisconsin. Isn't that pretty interesting? So we actually do roller coaster rides, and we go to horror films, and we do all kinds of stuff to poke the bear, so to speak. We do all kinds of things to rev up our system, to alleviate stress, because when stress is alleviated, it feels real good. We go to the horror film and something bad happened, but I didn't happen. I just walked out with, belly full of popcorn. That was good. So we have those kinds of things. So stress by itself is not a bad thing, but too much stress and uninvited stress is where we all get worn down. This system on the left here is there to save your life. That's what it's there for. You're going to run, you're going to fight, you're going to freeze, and you're going to live to be another day. In reality, when you don't have those kinds of things, it's killing you, because frequent doses of adrenaline and frequent doses of corticosteroids in your system wear you down. Adrenaline causes more atherosclerosis, and cortisol causes a lot of other dysfunction, including immune dysfunction and memory problems. So a lot of things going on there. What we're almost doing in those situations is trading long-term health for short-term survival. And we need to do that sometimes. Let's face it, sometimes you really need to do that. Sometimes you're walking out in the middle of the street and the car is coming. You got to have that response, boom. So we do know that kind of stuff is happening. So if nothing is going on and your mind and your life is pretty steady, not doing so badly, there's a part of your mind, we're going to call it the discursive mind. We're going to meet it tonight as the default mode network, as a little preview for tonight's talk, is there to kind of stir the pot. When you have an army and there's no war to fight, what does the army do? Plays war games. That's what we do. We play war games. So suddenly, and since no one has a perfect life, suddenly the little insults, the little things get elevated to great big deals. You're, and you have all of this kind of thing going on in your mind about, this really bad scenarios that might happen. So the catastrophizing. You're driving to work and you realize that last night you were supposed to do your car insurance. You were on your computer, you were clicking the right things, and then you got distracted and you left it and you never got your car insurance done. And now you're worried, do I have car insurance? I don't know if my car insurance will be any good. What happens if I get in an accident? This would be really bad if I got in an accident without car insurance, because it would be really bad. It could cost me a whole lot of money. And even if I have a lot of medical bills, they won't pay for that. And I'll end up ruined and I'll be in all kinds of trouble and I'll be in the gutter eating cat food. I mean, right? This is what happens from just one little thing like that. Does it sound familiar? I mean, that kind of scenario is the scenario that we all do that. And that's because there's a part of your brain that you have nurtured for years, for many, many generations, in all of your hunter-gatherer days, the discursive mind, which is heavily invested in fear and worry. It doesn't want to go out of business. It's worried about you losing it. It has its own fear and worry. You've got to depend on me. You've got to do that. So we have a negativity bias that we've got there and left unchecked. We keep going with it. And what we end up having is all our lives living in this pink zone. There's always something to worry about. There's always something to fear. Or we'll even put ourselves in situations where we do that kind of thing. We'll take on the extra job at work. We'll decide that we're going to volunteer for something else. We wear ourselves out. So the idea here is, and this is the whole idea behind the mindful, as a matter of fact, this, for people who are looking at this is a modified version of the guy that John Kabat-Zinn uses in mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is, I think, a bad title, but what the heck, he didn't ask me. The idea is that you just pay attention and allow and allow and allow, and don't let people come. Don't run away from your troubles. Turn towards your afflictions. Turn towards your afflictions, and they will resolve. Eventually, they will certainly become more manageable, and they won't bully you so much. So, any questions about that at all? Anybody have anything? Yes. Sure. Well, yeah, I didn't give you a chance to get your microphone over there. Sorry. So the question was an example of that kind of thing. Well, sure. I mean, let's say you've got a test tomorrow. You're a student and you've got a test. You do what you ever can do to prepare. You study, but you just kind of have tons and tons of worry about it, and the worry just drives you particularly crazy. Or you have a situation where you're going to your bowling league and you really want to be in first because that Roger guy, I really don't like him. If he wins again, I'm going to have a problem with that. And you worry about that. You worry about whether, oh gosh, the traffic's bad. Will I be able to pick up my kids from school on time? All of this stuff that's a good example. You got to go pick up your kids from school and you're running into traffic. What do? You can't do anything. You can't do anything. They're not going to sell your kids. Nothing bad's going to happen if you show up 10 minutes late, and yet we make it into this really huge deal. And the discursive mind, the worry mind says, aha, see, you need me. You need me to worry. Because if you didn't worry, you would have got down before that and there wouldn't be any traffic. Well, you can kind of always go with that sort of thing. We are eating ourselves alive by doing this kind of modern thought about negativity, but it's not really our fault. And it's not even our ancestors' fault. They were surviving and their negativity bias was justified. There really were tigers at their door or around the neighborhood or around the corner. But not for us so much. And it would be a little bit more, a little bit less of a problem if it was just our individual thing, but we make it tribal. So how many times, I mean, when you start looking at, for example, the political rhetoric, if that other side takes over, it will be a disaster. Either side of the fence you're on, they say that. Without really any evidence, but they kind of have, they kind of pull up those kind of worst case scenarios. So it's just a really, really deep problem that we have gotten into. And besides your individual health and the health of everybody else, it makes our society, this negativity bias makes our society more suspicious. So this is our work. Our work is to try to develop a positivity bias, which I'm going to get to, but also to be able to quiet this part of our nervous system, quiet the whole dialogue, the whole sort of the narrative that comes through that you're always in danger. So, anyone else have a question here? Anybody online have a question? I can't see the people online, so pop up if you've got some. So anyway, this is really quite simple and a difficult problem on the short term, but a very solvable problem. So, let's see, why is my mouse not doing anything? These are the kind of other long-term effects of having a lot of sympathetic and parasympathetic things. The sympathetic things, so people who have lots of muscular tension, a lot. I'm not saying everybody does this. A lot of backache is due to stress. It just really is a lot of it. Immune problems, sleep problems, memory problems, anxiety, cardiovascular injury for sure, GI problems. So I know that there's, am I in your way? Yeah. Yeah, so the big thing about kind of doing this is to be much more aware. When they started looking at, interestingly, talking about cardiac stuff, there's a little story about when people were describing type A personalities, one of the people was a cardiologist. And it was because of his association with his upholsterer. So he would, every 3 or 4 years, his cardiologist would have the chairs, the seat of his chairs in his office would wear out. And it had the upholsterer come in and redo it. And kind of do that. And I remember after it happened like 2 or 3 times, he talked to the upholsterer and he said, yeah, it's kind of annoying. I'm happy to do the work though. He says, yeah, but you must get this in all doctors' offices. He goes, no, just yours. So the people on edge there just kind of rocking back and forth, very much type. That's how we determined that whole type A personality was related to heart disease. So, all right. Oh yes, here it is, the half glass full or the half glass empty. There we go. I want to give you 2 practices here now that are related to this. So the first problem with being aware that we have difficulties with emotional regulation is that we get hijacked by our unwholesome emotions really quickly. So anger comes up and Anger is a big one. Everybody understands anger. Anger has this kind of, you know, anger has really actually a dopamine response to it because of its self-righteousness, and it's right there. And we don't think about being mindful about it because they're wrong. They're so wrong, right? You have that thought always. It's always about ego with anger. They're wrong. I don't like this. They're causing trouble for me. The second part, so that's with anger. The same thing kind of going on with fear and to some extent anxiety. Especially when they have sudden onset, they're so intense. They're so intense that what you do is whenever you're in a situation where stress is happening, the best thing to do is to actually be able to take care of it as soon as you can. You want to be mindful right as soon as you can, and that involves paying attention to your thoughts and your body sensations right away. If you wait 5 or 10 minutes or so, is it going to be useless for you to pay attention to your body sensations? No, not really, but not as good as catching it really, really early on. Noticing, and you may notice, for example, certain thoughts are kind of driving this thought, it being the main reason that a lot of our stuff is going on. Getting back to that discursive mind, they're the ones that are kind of cranking out those thoughts. So you have to practice. You have to practice if you want to do this well. So the exercise that is done, and it's in the handout here, is called stepping into fear. You could call it stepping into anger, stepping into anxiety, any of these unwholesome states that are causing stress. Doesn't have to be fear. But the person who invented this, Ron Siegel, calls it stepping into fear. So what we do is we rehearse. We think of an episode, or we put ourselves, when we're doing sitting meditation, if you're doing sitting meditation, you can take some time to do the stepping into fear exercise. You give yourself a little space, and then you imagine yourself in that particular situation where fear or anger or anxiety is provoked. And you feel it all, and in the safety of your cushion, you feel it all just right then and there. And you just allow it to be, so that when it does show up, it's not strange or unfamiliar. It's very familiar to you. So let's just kind of take a little time to just maybe drop in and do that a bit. So if you're comfortable with it, you might take a nice upright posture, breathing in, breathing out. And you're nice here, you're safe. You're at the Christine Center with a bunch of practitioners. You're in a safe place. You don't have to worry about it. So this is a great place to practice. So bring to your mind a situation that might cause you distress, or has caused you distress, or you expect will cause you distress tomorrow, or next week, or next month. And just bring it to mind and be there with it. And as you do that, dropping into your body, Notice the changes that might go into your body. Maybe there's a particular signature to your stress. Maybe there's a particular thought that seems to popping up every time this happens. So feel the tightness or the achiness or the restlessness. It's often hard to do the sitting on a cushion because you feel so restless about it. And just let it be. Allow yourself to be as fearful or as angry or as anxious as you can. You may notice that by merely paying attention, your difficulty cannot be sustained. That the real problem with our fear, anger, and anxiety is our feeding it like feeding the wrong wolf. Turn towards your afflictions. You can't run away from them, they will chase you down. So turn and greet them, even if they're a crowd of sorrows. difficulty arises, it will not seem so peculiar to you when your conversation with the difficult person, when the difficult situation at your workplace or your school shows up, you can greet it with more equanimity, peace of mind. Any comments about that? Any experiences with that? People want to say anything? I will mention in my own life that this is an exercise I do before flying. I have that kind of fear of flying. I haven't been on an airplane in a couple of years now because of the pandemic, but I definitely, and you know, I all of that rational stuff, you know, getting on an airplane is safer than driving a car, and et cetera, et cetera. I knew all that sort of stuff, but logically I couldn't get through it. But with this exercise, I start doing it like as part of my daily meditation. Yeah, about 2 weeks before I'm going to go on a plane flight. And then I just step on without any trouble. It's really quite magical that way. So anything about the, and just so you know, the idea about our thoughts, you know, our thoughts that we generate are, of course, not always true. So it's another thing to keep in mind, that when you're getting into these kinds of either anxiety states that are done by your discursive mind or whatever, we often are generating thoughts that are just things that we don't necessarily need to hold on to just because they're our thoughts. We'll talk a little bit about that, and if people are interested, we can do thought meditation tomorrow morning about that. So, all right.
Paul,
Yeah.
it's Dottie.
Yes.
Yes, in this last exercise, uh, a world leader came to mind that I have a lot of angst over,
Mm-hmm.
and I was getting into that feeling, and I guess you'd say practicing, rehearsing, and it
Mm-hmm.
was too painful, and I could tell I was resisting that exercise, and it flipped immediately into compassion because uh, I found more comfort in that.
Yeah. Thanks, Dottie. Yeah, I think at least my root teacher would say we should never take in more than we can handle. And if you're doing this exercise because there's a difficult situation that you're dealing with and it's a little overwhelming, yeah, drop back and do compassion for yourself. Do a compassion exercise for yourself, if you have one, and or just do loving kindness for yourself under those situations. That may be useful. So, anyone else? So, in addition to the idea of having these kind of negative things, we have a negativity bias, this balance that's almost like the way that the autonomic nervous system is. We don't have a lot on the positivity side. It's really interesting because somehow we really, I don't know, almost like the negative side. The newspapers, even when there isn't, a war going on in Europe, the newspapers are absolutely full of the negative. They're just that way. It quote unquote sells soap. I say I have a couple positive news feeds. If people would like to look sometime at either Future Crunch, like Captain Crunch, except it's Future Crunch, or the Progress Network, you'll find out a whole lot of wonderful things that are going on that you weren't aware of in the world simply because of that. And they're not as spicy, the kinds of things that go on with that. So we have to, I mean, we don't have to, but one of the things that we can do is to get into supporting the good. You know, in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition, we have. I won't go into all of the details about how it is, but the mind is looked at as a garden, and when we take care of all of our neuroses, say, what happens is it's like going to a garden that, you know, we pulled out all the weeds, we got rid of the dandelions, we, you know, kind of pulled out the buckthorn, all that sort of stuff in our garden is really kind of nice. And it's this big flat piece of dirt. This is, I think, the way Western psychology had been until recently, with several people now talking about positive psychology. So instead of having our garden just be this empty thing of dirt, maybe we can plant trees. Maybe we can plant wonderful flowers or delicious vegetables or something along those lines. So I'm going to tell you that this is my modification here. Rick Hanson, in his book Hardwiring Happiness, but also I think it's in Neurodharma as well. He has this kind of thing. We all like, you know, mnemonics, right? We all like to have the initials. The HEAL, it's what he has. And the H is, the first is have a good event. I mean, we're not always having good events. We just don't ever kind of think about them, but have a good event. Whenever you're having an event, just kind of pay attention to it, like we pay attention to our difficulties. The E stands for enrich, right? That means pay attention to the details. Oh, this was happening on a Saturday afternoon. It was rainy outside. There had been an ice storm the night before. That kind of stuff. You know, I was wearing, you know, with this particular shirt. You know, I was feeling in this particular way, and then kind of relate that event to that thing. So getting a few extra details when things are going on is very useful. So E stands for enrich. A is absorb. Feel what it feels like in your body. Feel like what well-being feels like in your body. Kind of go with that and see how that goes for you. And then I've made a modification, and I've never talked to Rick Hanson. I've never talked to Rick Hanson about anything, but I haven't talked about this in particular, especially since it makes an analogy. Here, HEAR is my particular mnemonic. His is HEAL, and he even says that the L is a mnemonic for link, meaning if you're having a difficulty, link it to something else. So, I mean, actually, I kind of do this sort of thing. So I've got this chronically bad left ankle from playing too much basketball in my youth. And like a lot of us, we're older with arthritis. My right ankle's fine. So sometimes when my left ankle acts up, I actually have the right ankle kind of, you know, linked to the left ankle to give it some sort of solace, something along those lines. But more likely, you can do this. This is my positive event cards. As human beings, we have a lot of kind of things that are at disposal. Clearly, we're not very good at remembering our good events. We're just not. That's the Teflon part of that particular equation. So, but we're human beings. We can write things down. we can save things. So that's what I have here. I have a cards, and I shuffle them up and turn them over every once in a while when I want to do this particular practice. So I have these kind of good event cards, things that have happened in my life. And when things show up, I will write something down new and I edit them over a while. Usually I have about 70 or so. And this is a really interesting practice to do. You can always have this little cache of positive event things. But before we go, let's just kind of sit here and do the HEAR practice that requires that you're going to have to, if you can, I'm sure you can, remember a good event. And we'll go from there. So think of a time when happiness was easy. You were in a special place. You were with people that supported this. You were in a situation where everything was easy. Almost always these things are unplanned, aren't they? They just kind of show up out of anywhere. And as much as you can, see if you can remember the details. What was happening there? Who were you with? What day of the week was it, if you know that? What month of the year? What were the colors that were present on the walls, or what people were wearing, or the automobile you were driving, or any of that sort of thing? And absorbing into your body, feeling, where does it feel like in your body, that good feeling? In your chest, abdomen, anywhere, arms, legs, perhaps in your nose and mouth. Where does this feeling of good feeling that you had, where does it reside in your body? Feel the universe supporting your existence. And now maybe if you just want to put that aside, find another one, maybe unrelated to time. What were the details? What was going on? Form those beautiful little memories in there. How did it feel in your body? How does the body of well-being feel? And now maybe if you can, putting aside, find a third event like that. Feeling the welling body of well-being. So much happiness. It is difficult to know what to do with so much happiness. With sadness, there is something to rub against, a wound to tend with lotion and cloth. When the world falls in around you, you have pieces to pick up, something to hold in your hands like ticket stubs or change. But happiness floats. It doesn't need you to hold it down. It doesn't need anything. Happiness lands on the roof of the next house singing and disappears when it wants to. You're happy either way. Even the fact that you once lived in a peaceful tree house and now live over a quarry of noise and dust cannot make you unhappy. Everything has a life of its own. It too could wake up filled with possibility of coffee cake and ripe peaches and love, even the floor which needs to be swept, the soiled linens and the scratched records. Since there is no place large enough to contain so much happiness, you shrug, you raise your hands, and it flows out of you into everything you touch. You are not responsible. You take no credit, as the sky takes no credit for the moon, but continues to hold it and share it, and in that way be known. Naomi Shahib Nye, so much happiness. So any comments about that experience? I will tell, yeah, anyone? I will tell you that there's something about our negativity bias that goes that way, that it's real easy to find negativity in our body. And a lot of it goes with how I think we have been taught to not necessarily like our body, but it's real easy to find negativity in your body. Whatever your stress response is, for example. So as an example for me, I get a dry mouth. So when I'm doing my stepping into fear, I just kind of notice that I have a dry mouth. I don't try to extra salivate or anything, but I kind of do that way. Actually, and when I do get on plane flights, I ask for that little cup of water. That kind of thing going on. And you may have something else. It may be, aching in your shoulders, heaviness in your chest or your gut or anything else. So these signatures of our negativity bias are really there a lot. But our signatures of our positivity bias are really hard to find. We don't notice it very much unless we stop back and do that. For me, there's kind of a lightness associated with that, but it's taken a while for me to really notice that. Our bodies are really very good at getting the heaviness and difficulties down, but not necessarily that sense of well-being. So that's something that we might be able to work on. And like I say, I recommend you get yourself index cards, just sit down and do it. It's a lot of fun, and I always just open it up and say, yeah, there's one. That really kind of goes good with you. So any other comments at all about this? Yes. Oh, okay. So, what to give, she asked what was on my cards. So I open up this one. It says May 28th, 2016, the green on Newberry Boulevard. Newberry Boulevard is the place just north of the Mindfulness Center. And during an afternoon of sitting meditation, I took a walk in the middle of it and just walked down the meridian of that. It's one of those big, long, the meridian. And it was immensely green and flowing, and I remembered it. And in order for me to remember that, I wrote it down on the card. So there's a lot of cards like this about my life. Some of them are things going back, way back in my childhood. So, things that I remember. It's interesting. I remember probably the earliest one in my cards is something that I just remembered around my father's celebration of my father's birthday. It was in January, but I mean, he's long since deceased. About something that he did. He used to, way back when in the 50s, you could swim in Lake Erie. Hard to believe that, but we used to swim in Lake Erie. And we lived in Erie, Pennsylvania, and he would, and I was just, I was 6 when we left Erie, so this is a very early memory. We'd go there for after church and have breakfast on the beach. And he would take me out to a sandbar. I'd get on his back and get carried out to a sandbar in the middle. So even though it wasn't part of my cards before, it is now. So all these kinds of things, you can kind of realize the richness of your life and kind of go on with it that way. So, yeah. Anyone else? Any other comments or questions? Yeah.
So following up on that, so the purpose of the cards is just to kind of point your mind in a direction of positive things that are part of your life.
Yes.
So retraining yourself to be not so negative.
Yeah, I mean, it's a balance, right?
Yeah.
And if your mind is, for want of a better term, empty, you all know this, what trickles in is usually not positive thoughts, but negative ones, right? I mean, they come to the fore much more readily. Our negativity bias is strong, so that when left to having nothing to do, we think about, this is going on. In fact, it's one of those things, I'm not doing anything. I should be doing something constructive. I should be holding a bake sale or something, I mean, it just kind of goes that way. So yeah, this is training to balance that kind, and this will quiet somewhat that big, ugly, discursive mind. So, yeah. Anyone else? Yes. Microphone back there. We're in the microphone mode. I like the microphone mode, though. It's a good thing. Yeah.
I was just going to share that during the fear meditation, I felt it in my back body, shoulders, low back. And then during the good or positive meditation, I felt it more in my front body.
Oh.
So just wondering if there's some sort of correlation between the back body and negativity and front body and positivity. I just thought that was interesting that I felt it all on my back for the negative part and all on my front for the positive.
Well, for you there is, and,
right.
And that's the important part. No, really. And although I will say this, one of the kind of mistakes of evolution that we're all catching up with is we went from being 4-legged creatures to 2-legged creatures, and our backs don't work so well. And so it's real easy when you have too much, for want of a better term, sympathetic tone and not enough parasympathetic tone for your back to get out of whack. So many people feel stress in their back. And, for you, it might be that. For other people, it might be just the opposite. For other people, they might get, a squeezing in their chest when they're having difficulties. But when they feel good. They feel like their shoulders are open. They feel like they're in that kind of power pose type thing. So it might be different for everybody. Just like I have a signature for my stress, meaning the dry throat, you might have a signature for stress that might be the back. And the interesting thing is sometimes that may be the only sign. What the John Kabat-Zinn course taught me was that about a third of what you can call stress responses are not really conscious. Isn't that interesting? I mean, we all know about the time that you're worried and fearful, but if you pay attention to that. So I was officiating a wedding, and it was some people that were really close to me. And I remember saying, this is no big deal. I can do this. I've officiated weddings before. It was, in a backyard, and I had to speak loud, but that was about the biggest, kind of stressor about that. But I was thirsty. So had a nice big glass of water, kind of calming down about an hour before I'm doing this. And about 15 minutes later, I'm thirsty again. And I drank more water and I said, wait a second. How can I do that? How can I be that thirsty? It's not that hot of a day. What I was really getting acknowledgement was, I really was stressed about doing this. I really was stressed about doing this, and that kind of dryness in my throat was telling me that. So sometimes if you're really familiar with your stress response and it's showing up for no particular reason, there may be a reason, yeah. But it's great that I think it's just great that you actually found a positivity, because that's, I think, really one of those things that I think is a really wonderful thing to kind of cultivate, is what's the positivity in our body when our body feels good? And we don't do that very much. So anyone else? All righty. So the Dharma doors here are turn towards your afflictions, turn towards your joy. I mean, quite frankly, it's like pay attention to everything. Pay attention to everything without discrimination. Just kind of say, yes, this is a difficulty. I remember actually, I heard another Dharma teacher, I'll say this to somebody, and then I kind of, caught up on that was, person says, I feel like my life is a runaway truck. I'm always one step ahead of it and it's right behind me. And the advice was, turn around and embrace the truck. Not always that easy to kind of do, but as many of us have found, trying to run away from our afflictions is difficult. But it's a relatively, even if you're good at that, even if you're really good at handling your afflictions, it can be kind of an empty life if you don't cultivate your garden. So turning towards your joy, whatever it is, and realize you deserve the joy. You deserve the joy. And really kind of experience that your mind is Teflon for joy. And you won't remember them very easily unless you practice. And so that's what that kind of thing is about. My 3 resources there, and I don't have specific books, but there's, because they have so many. Ron Siegel actually has, for people who like great courses, he's got a really great course called The Science of Mindfulness. Just terrific. Really, really, really wonderful. One of my favorite things. John Kabat-Zinn is got Full Catastrophe Living, which is a wonderful book, plus a lot of other follow-ups. And Justin Brewer, that should be Judson. I'm sorry. Why did I put Justin? It's Judson. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Judson Brewer is a person who has been dealing with afflictions and addictions in particular, and has some really interesting ways to deal with anxiety. He also has, it's kind of an interesting thing that I just kind of learned this over the winter when I heard him, being interviewed, that Anxiety can be addicting. It can be an addiction. Even if it's difficult, you can end up having an addiction to anxiety. And that's an interesting thing to kind of treat it more like an addiction than an affliction, although they're kind of similar with that. By that, I mean, you get a little burst of dopamine when things work. So, for example, best example of that is if you put a red mark on your door to keep the elephants away. You have your neighborhood, you put a big red mark on your door. Your neighbors ask, what's that for? I said, to keep the elephants away. Well, there are no elephants in Wisconsin. See how well that's working? Even if so let's say, here's an example of how that might be an addiction, the idea of anxiety being an addiction. Your teenager is out at night and it's past curfew, and you're worried about all the kinds of things that go on with that. Your worrying is actually doing nothing. You know that, but you can't stop worrying, and you worry and you worry and you worry. And they come home half an hour, 45 minutes late, and they apologize, and nothing bad has happened. They're not in a hospital or in a jail, and everything is good. You go, whew. Your mind interprets it this way. You worried, and you got a good result. Great. You get a little dopamine push. Your worrying had nothing to do with the good result, but you think it does. And so often worrying on those kinds of situations can be a bit of an addiction. So, all right.